I'm Haley B. Miller, and this is Ohio Politics Explained, a podcast where you give us 15 minutes and we give you all the news you need to sound smart and impress your friends. Welcome back to Ohio Politics Explained. Today, we'll discuss the fight for Ohio Speaker, the long-awaited outcome of one of Ohio's congressional races, how Senator-elect Bernie Moreno views Trump's cabinet picks, and what might be next for Senator Sherrod Brown. Joining me today is Jesse Balmer.
Thanks for having me.
Real quick, before we get going, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, I just wanted to throw out there that I would be super thankful if you would consider leaving us a review or rating on Apple Podcasts. Now, on to the House Speaker race. Republicans decided behind closed doors Wednesday to choose Senate President Matt Huffman as the next speaker. Huffman is moving over to the House in January and campaigned for months against the current speaker, Jason Stephens. And then Stephens surprised us all this week and dropped out 2 days before the vote.
Yeah, for a speaker's race that's really been going on, like you said, for months, more than a year now, a lot has happened in the last week. Jason Stephens, who's the current speaker, Republican, of course, he decided to not seek re-election for that position. I believe, generally suspecting that he wasn't going to have the votes to succeed. There was a short period of time, really about 48 hours, where Representative Tim Barhorse threw his hat into the ring and tried to garner some support for a challenge to Senate President Matt Huffman. But ultimately, that was unsuccessful. Barhorse didn't even have someone nominate him on Wednesday night when they held this vote. So Republicans picked Matt Huffman.
And Barhorse had me wondering for a little bit there because he was able to get some support from an Ohio gun group, quote, medical freedom organization that has opposed vaccine mandates in Ohio. So it seemed like there was kind of this grassroots conservative movement that emerged, but it just seemed like it was too little too late, especially when, you had people really ever since Stephens was elected working to get Huffman in the top spot.
Yeah, I think you summarized it really well there. This is a race that's been going on for a while, and it would have been really hard to pull it out in the last minutes and kind of 11th hour situation there. I think the House has always been interesting. There's nearly always a challenge in the House to who's going to be the speaker, and we've had some really interesting races recently where Democrats have gotten involved in the final vote to elect both Jason Stephens and previously Larry Householder. And so it's just an interesting place. So you contrast that with the Senate, where these things are nearly always resolved months before the person is eventually selected. So it's partially there's just more members in the Ohio House of Representatives, more interests, more personalities than the Senate, where people tend to at least get on board.
Yeah. And speaking of the Senate, they selected their next leader earlier in the day. Senator Rob McCauley will replace Huffman as Senate president, which is a surprise to no one in the Cap Square bubble. McCauley has been really primed for this position for a while now. He and Huffman are pretty tight. What do you think we can expect from the Huffman-McCauley reign of the legislature?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because if Matt Huffman is ultimately selected as speaker, if that goes through in January with the official vote with all 99 members, he could potentially serve in this position for 8 years. He has that amount of time on term limits. And then Rob McCauley, I believe, will have about 2 years in this role. I think you could expect to see things like vouchers, private school vouchers being a priority. I think you could see this higher education bill that has really stalled in the House to make some pretty sweeping changes. You could see that move forward. It'll be interesting to see what this means for marijuana policy, because the House has really been kind of slowing down some of the changes with that as well. Concerned, want to take a more methodical look at the changes, especially not wanting to go against what voters approved last year. So I think you will also see more bills passing because Huffman and Stephens have not being seeing eye to eye. Not surprising that they were running for the same job. And so that has slowed down progress at the Ohio legislature. It's been one of the least productive as far as bills passing General Assemblies in recent history.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how this shapes lame duck over the next few weeks, if they try to knock out some stuff or if the conventional wisdom is let's just deal with it in January.
Yeah, I think there's some things that are kind of universally agreed upon, things like this really exciting public works amendment that'll be put on the May primary is pretty uncontroversial. I think you'll see things like that move forward, but kind of your larger, bigger lift issues, I'd be surprised if that doesn't get tackled next year, maybe in the budget.
Our next topic is Ohio's 9th Congressional District. Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur officially defeated State Rep Derek Merrin this week in a very, very tight race. The Associated Press had this race as too close to call until Wednesday, when county election officials had to submit certified results to the Secretary of State's office. Kaptur is the longest serving woman in Congress, and this will be term 22 for her. We've been analyzing the future of Ohio's Democratic Party a lot lately. What do you take away from Kaptur's win?
So it's really a remarkable win in a lot of ways. This is a district that under the previous version of her district, she represented the Snake on the Lake. So that stretched from Cleveland to Toledo. This district is based in Toledo, which makes more sense to not look like a snake, but also makes it much harder for her to win. Really, she won Lucas County, but none of the other counties in the district. But Marcy Kaptur is really well known in this area. She has, had tremendous constituent services over the years. And so she was able to keep those margins closer in the other counties. On a day when Donald Trump, the former and future president, won Ohio by more than 11 percentage points, it is impressive that any Democrats were able to really hold on.
Yeah, and Kaptur did have an easier time with her race in 2022 under this map, but Derek Merrin had a lot more experience in office. He was much less controversial in the broader GOP world. He had support from Trump and U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson. So it was always going to be a more competitive race. And the fact that we almost had a recount certainly reflects that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's also worth noting that the congressional map, if I don't talk about redistricting, is it even a podcast? The congressional map does need to be redrawn for 2026. And so I would expect Republicans would be taking a look at this district to see what they might be able to do to win next time.
Let's change lanes and talk about Senator-elect Bernie Moreno. President-elect Donald Trump has made a lot of headlines about his cabinet picks, from RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz to a former congressman who once starred in Real World. Moreno has said that he supports all of Trump's nominees, which is not really surprising in a lot of ways, but a couple stood out. He said that he would back former Fox News host who's been accused of sexual assault, and he was behind former Congressman Matt Gaetz until we literally just learned that Gaetz is withdrawing from consideration. But Gaetz has been very controversial for a lot of reasons, and Moreno is still willing to get on board with that. It seems like, Moreno has made it pretty clear that he'll be a rubber stamp for whatever Trump is looking to do.
Yeah, I think these nominees are really a loyalty test for members of the Senate Republicans. And in a lot of ways, Bernie Moreno passed that test in his, wide support for the presidential selections. I do think there are other Senate Republicans who have concerns, particularly about Gaetz and the other nominees that you mentioned. And so we shall see if those fly through. It's worth noting that, Trump's nominees in 2018, there were certainly some challenges, but there were also some people with just more policy experience and fewer red flags.
And I mean, if Gaetz is any indication, there could be a lot more changes to any of these nominations between now and January, when confirmation hearings will start. So I guess we'll see what happens.
We will.
Our last topic of the day is Senator Sherrod Brown, who lost to Moreno in this month's election. He is out of a job come January, but the rumors are already swirling about what could be next for him. Politico recently asked him if he would run for Vice President-elect J.D. Vance's Senate seat, and Brown said he's not ruling anything out. He's also been mentioned as a potential candidate for governor in 2026. Good idea? Bad idea?
It's certainly an interesting idea. It also speaks to just kind of the bench that Ohio Democrats have and who has the name recognition, the fundraising prowess, the ability to connect to voters that Sherrod Brown currently has. And it's hard to think of another name. And so I think he's going to be an attractive candidate for governor, for senator. Given his experience in DC, you would think he would lean more towards like a federal position than running for governor. But, you know, maybe he wants to stay closer to home. Other names that have been mentioned for governor, though no one has actively like confirmed they're mounting a bid, is former Ohio Department of Health Director Amy Acton, and also House Minority Leader Allison Russo are taking a look at those statewide bids.
And for those of you sitting there thinking, well, Sherrod Brown just lost an election, we are expecting 2026 to be a better year for Democrats than this was. The conventional wisdom is that the party in power always struggles during their midterm elections, and Republicans have control of all three branches starting in January. So I think Democrats like their odds in a couple years. And for Brown, he may see the environment as more favorable than it was this time.
Yeah, it's hard to think of a less favorable environment than he had in 2024. He really outperformed other Democrats. You know, he was within 3 or 4 percentage points versus, like we said before, 11 percentage points for Donald Trump. That's just too much for really anyone to overcome. And I believe there was some comments to that effect in like some of the post-election analysis, even from former Ohio Republican Party Chair Bob Paduchik. And so, yeah, so 2026 will be better for Republicans than 24. Will it be good enough to win some races statewide? That's, you know, hard to see.
And one more thing before you go. We are taking next week off for Thanksgiving. We hope you have a great holiday. And I personally believe politics is not a dish that goes well with pumpkin pie.
No, just stick to your pecan and your pumpkin pie and talk about vacations.
Ohio Politics Explained is brought to you by the USA Today Network Ohio Bureau. You can check us out on X, formerly known as Twitter, @Ohio Explained.